while a flashback-heavy episode provides us with the origin story we didn't know we needed. Hey guys, here's my review for Hey guys, Cage, Season 1, Episode 4, Step in the Arena, and I was definitely looking forward to this episode, especially the way the last episode ended. I really didn't know the way this episode was going to play out. I mean, the fact that Cottonmouth had now declared war, and he shot that rocket launcher, I had no idea what was going to happen in this episode, and I have to say, this episode wasn't as good as I thought as the, last two have been, but this still was a great episode. What we got here, I really did enjoy overall. There wasn't Cottonmouth in this episode, and his absence definitely was missed. Like, I definitely did miss Cottonmouth in this episode overall, but what we got here was great. I mean, this episode was essentially the backstory of Luke Cage, or Carl Lucas, whatever you really want to call him. But let's just get in this episode, because there is a lot that went down. Not a ton in terms of what went down in the present, but in terms of the past, it was a very flashback-heavy episode, and, the episode opens up, and the city needs all hands on deck to clean up the rubble from Genghis Khani's. Once the detectives arrive on the scene, Misty asks if there's been any survivors, and the firefighter says that her guess is as good as theirs. Lucky only the restaurant and the apartments above collapsed, and not the whole structure, but it could have been a hell of a lot worse. Scarf asks who the other guy is, and the firefighter says that he's the owner, who says his wife and him were inside and when it happened, and Misty says to give her a call if anything changes. Scarf asks if she's okay. She says that this is Luke Cage's place, and realizes that obviously Luke is in danger. She says that this was outside in and not inside out. He says that if that was true, there'd be shit all across the street, like projectiles if the explosion had been inside. She sees a camera and says that if it works, then they'll get their answers, because obviously they don't know, who the perpetrator was or how this all went down, but Scarf says if it does, he'll call it the precinct and have them look at it, and says they've got their job to do and they have theirs. So Misty goes to the man, asks if he's sure Luke is in there with her. He says he thinks so, but he's not entirely sure, and throughout most of the episode, Luke is trapped in this building. So basically, through him being trapped here, we get the perfect time to get into his backstory, and his backstory in general is very interesting. We meet him back when he was called Carl Lucas, and he's kind of unrecognizable. He has this huge beard. He has tons of hair. I mean, this is not the Luke Cage we knew, because he wasn't called Luke Cage yet. And the prison guard Rockham tells them that they're in there, they have no rights, and are no longer considered a citizen. And Rockham is my main problem in this episode. Not that Rockham's a bad character. He's just every, gruff, snooty prison guard that you've seen, and there just wasn't much else to him besides that. He's hellbent on destroying all the prisoners, and that's really all we see. There's not really much else to him than that, and I thought he played the role well. It's just he kind of annoyed me at points, and I wish they would have given him maybe a little bit more development, but basically, he tells them as long as they follow the rules, they'll be fine, such as obeying everything, and he says after rule number 1, and no one's allowed to pray, and the final one being that they're not allowed to talk when he's talking. So, obviously, he gives them all these rules, and you can clearly see that he definitely is the one that makes the rules there. So, Carl's punched in the stomach and falls to the ground, says that he's not used to this new life yet. Rockham said it's a good thing he has many years to adjust, and tells him that how they start is how they'll end in places like this, and tells him to get into their cells, and he obviously hates his time in there, and he tries to break free, but he tells himself, just remember who you are, you'll get through this, and obviously it's very hard for me. You can tell this is a very rough transition, and it's this great scene where he's saying, you are Carl Lucas, that's the thing that really keeps him going. So in counseling, he ends up meeting his wife, his not wife yet, but will be his wife, Riva, who I thought it was clever the way they utilized Riva, because one of the biggest parts of the season has been him grieving over Riva. When you think about it, we haven't really seen much of Riva. We saw her in a few flashbacks, we've heard about her, but we haven't actually seen her. So by seeing her, it not only gets us to care more about the relationship, but it makes us feel even worse that she died, and especially when you see what she did for Carl in this episode, it really does show, why he feels such a great loss from Riva. And in counseling, basically, she was the counselor of the prison, and she tells them to each go around and say, what they need to confess. She first goes to someone named Reggie, who likes to be called Squabbles, and talks about how he used to have a job, a family, and a life. Riva says that he still has a family, and he says he hasn't seen them in years. He asks them for forgiveness, but they don't really seem to care about it, and he hasn't seen them since he first got here. So she asks Carl, and he says he doesn't need to or want to have to get to know anyone, and she says that's like wasting yourself to get to solitaire without actually going to the hole. He says they can't trust anyone in a place like this, and she asks if it's because he used to be a cop. He says he's not the first cop to do time, and he hasn't ever sent anyone to Seagate, so he doesn't have that problem. But trust in places like that sets him up for failure. He knows that obviously he's going to clash with everyone because he's not really a criminal. I mean, you can tell. So Squabble says he knows she didn't mean no harm, and Carl says reminding him of what he doesn't have can be pretty damn mean. Squabble says he can help him focus and says this type of loneliness in here can kill. And Carl says it doesn't if you stay strong, and Squabble says if you believe that he's dumb, strength has its limits, and everyone eventually caves in. So Carl tells him if he's looking for a friend to keep looking because he's not interested at this point. He just kind of wants to go about himself. You know, he feels like he doesn't belong there, and it can be hard to find one in a place like this. Squabble says it's hard, and most of them act like him, so basically, he's trying to tell him, look, you're not alone. You know, we're in here for reasons kind of like you are. You know, we're just as upset as you are. You know, we're not just criminals who have no emotions. And I really like Squabble's character overall. I really like the dynamic that these two had. And it really did make up for Cottonmouth not being in the episode, or most of the characters. I mean, there's no Mariah. There's no, well, Shades is in this episode because it's in prison. But the only characters that are in this episode that are main are obviously Luke, Misty, Shades, and that's it. Not Cottonmouth, not Mariah. They're not in this episode, and I thought it was very interesting to see that, but it really does work, you know, by having all of these characters in the prison really did make up for the lack of, you know, the main characters in the show we had in general. So Rockham is then with Shades, who is in a prison at the time, as we know. We still don't really, and we basically find out in this episode, you know, why Luke has such personal beef against Shades. You know, what did Shades do to him that got Luke to have such a grudge against him? And there's this another man named Comanche, and they talk about how Carl ended up in prison. Comanche talks about how there are only 3 things that keep a man in prison, which are pride, power, and pussy. Rockham says they're going to see if he bends or breaks, and one night 2 people, including Shades, tries to kill Luke, but he's able to fight them off, luckily. The guards then catch up to him, place him in solitary confinement, and Rockham then tries to convince him to join a prison fight club, and tells him if he survives, he will get to be his own man, untouched, extra rations, maybe even a conjugal or 2, and Carl luckily agrees, even compares it to slavery, which honestly, he's not wrong. I mean, the way that Rockham's treating is like how they did with slavery, and I thought it was very interesting the way that was done, but he obviously wants no part of this, you can definitely tell, and we go back to the present. Luke finally wakes up, as well as Connie. Connie is somehow okay, and her leg we see is very badly damaged. He's able to get Connie out of the blast radius in time, but they need to get out of the rubble, or else the whole place will blow due to all the gas. Luke then removes the rubble while telling Connie that, and I love how casually he's just like, you know, I'm kind of strong, and obviously, you know, he's really fucking strong. He's not just kind of strong, he's really strong. So, I really like that. Carl sees Squabbles and goes to him. They talk about sexy black celebrities such as Beyonce, Nicki Minaj, but Squabbles seems fixated on Lisa Bonet, who Carl informs him has a daughter, Zoe Bonet, or as he calls her, Godfather Part 2, since she's a lot better than the original, just like a sequel. So he's then back in group therapy with Riva, who talks about how they have to own up to what they did, and says even if they were set up, they have to see their involvement in what went down. And Carl asks if she says that to herself, asks her what right she has to listen to them. She doesn't share anything about herself, and she says it's not her role. He says trust needs to be earned, and maybe if she tells him what she's fighting, they'll be a little more open to do the same. And he asks her if she did something wrong that she needs to take responsibility for, and she says she did. He asks what happened, and she doesn't say anything, so we don't know exactly what she did, but after therapy, she asks Carl to stay behind, and the guard gives him 2 minutes. She says that this is the most he said since he's been in there. He says he may have gone a few words past necessary, and she says and basically she tells him what happened, that her brother died in jail while she was getting her master's. She knew they needed help, but at the time she felt like all she could do, and she has regretted that way since, obviously. You know, she feels like she's the cause of it, and he says he's sorry he pressed, and she says that he did, tells him not to be sorry, tells him to not act like he did it for the guys because he did it to keep her from pressing him, obviously. So he says he's guilty of it. She asks what that question sparked in him, and he says he knows what it's like to be on the side, and from where he is, that idea seems like bullshit. And she asks if he's innocent. He says that it doesn't matter. She says that he is, and he says he's guilty of a lot of things that people will never know, and he guesses it's Karma's way of telling him that she can be a bitch, and she says that he should tell the group that, and he says he doesn't, she really, and he realizes that she actually does care. You know, she's not just there because this is her job. She actually does seem to care about about the prisoners. And she says that she does. Afterwards, her boss comes up to her. She says this is the first time he's seen a prisoner leave him speechless. And she says that he's in prison, but he's no prisoner. So she's clearly starting to see that he's actually a good guy and that he's not really there, because of his own reasons. He's obviously there. We don't know why, but obviously he was either framed or in prison for some reason. And Misty and Scarf in the precinct look at the footage, realize that it was not a gas leak, wonder who would use a rocket launcher in Harlem, because again, it's very impractical. And Misty asks who they think would do it, and obviously she knows it to be Cottonmouth. So back in Seagate, Reva says some people think that people are being experimented on in Seagate, and Squabbles agrees, says Jimmy Quinto talked about it and he wasn't lying, and she says that he was probably did a plea bargain or testify, but Squabble says that it can't be true. She says she knows that they all think that since Seagate is private that there's some X-Files stuff permeating the place, but there's not. She says there's more than likely Jimmy just got out. So Carl says the only problem is she works for Seagate, so if it's true, why would she admit it? And she says he has a good point, but gives him her word. Squabble says as long as he's been here, he never heard her give her word. He stays behind, and basically that he's on, good terms with her. So he stays behind to help her stack chairs, and they did a really good job of getting us to root for Carl and Reva, because we do know that these two end up together eventually, but again, this is supposed to be before these two are together. So they really did a good job with setting up this love story and getting us to really understand why Carl would like someone like Reva and how these two ended up together. It was honestly really sweet, and one of the strongest points of the episode definitely was their relationship. And she asks why she can't get him to talk, says he's not a murderer or serial killer, he's a man who trusts the wrong people and made a few mistakes and caught a bad break. And he asks if she knows how he caught the bad break. He says he did by talking to people and trusting them. She asks why he came here, and he says it's because she provides hope, and she thanks him, and they bond. And Rockham sees this go down. This is the part that kind of pisses me off, the fact that Rockham, pretty much throughout the whole episode, just trying to destroy him. We don't really get a reason why, though. Why does he want to destroy Luke so bad? What is he so envious about? What is it about Luke that Rockham does not like? We don't know by the end of this episode, and that's something that just didn't really work for me. I get that obviously Rockham's supposed to be, that angry prison warden, but I kind of was hoping that we find out why exactly he was so against, Carl and Reva being together, and we don't really get the reason why, and that kind of pissed me off a little bit. Other than that, I really enjoyed the episode, but just Rockham in general really just did not work for me. So Rockham sees Carl and Reva together and confronts him about it and says that getting caught up with her isn't the smartest thing to do. He asks if he's looking out for him and for her, and Rockham says if he wants pussy, he can get him that, and if he wants extra shit, he can give him that too. And Carl said this about him fighting, it's not a lane he wants to play in, and Rockham says that he must smell a lot of shit having his ass on his shoulders all the time. He makes him an easy offer, and he just shrugs it off. Obviously he wants no part of it, and Rockham says a good thing. He's a patient man and is strong enough to know he'd say no. He says to give him time to think of a backup plan, and in a second effort to get him to join the Fight Club, he has two of his people beat up on Squabbles, which is crazy scene. When he tells them to stop, he agrees to do what he says, but says Squabbles must be by his side every step of the way, and that is the only way that he will fight. Squabbles and Reva are the two people he feels comfortable with. Everyone else he feels like, they're just criminals, and he needs Squabbles by his side. So Squabbles agrees to be his personal trainer, and I really like Squabbles as a character, I forgot to say. I thought he was just a lot of fun to watch, and he talks about how he learned how to fight by watching Kung Fu movies. However, he reveals that his favorite actor to be Jet Li instead of Bruce Lee, and says he knows how to fight from selling dope. So Carl and Squabbles are led, and that's probably the reason why Squabbles went to prison, because of drugs. And Carl and Squabbles then are led to the club by Comanche, who tells them that they can't get anything they want in this joint, boobs, bitches, and Carl says he doesn't want any of that. Comanche asks who, he really is, and he calls him the N-word, and Carl says he's the kind of man that doesn't like to be called the N-word, and he starts to fight a man. So back in the present, Luke asks Connie, how her leg is, and she says it's probably broken, asks how he's doing this. We then see a montage of Luke fighting many men, and Squabbles says he's changing and he's not really taking care of himself. Carl asks why, and Squabbles asks when the last time was that he showered or cut his hair, and says that it just seems like he's spiraling down. It just seems like really that, Rockham's getting him and that it actually is working. And Carl says when he finds a way to cut all this shit loose and get them out from under Rockham, he will, but he can't right now. And they continue training. He says he sees Reva watching, and he goes to her, and she asks what happened to him and asks if he was attacked. And at this point, his beard is much longer, and he's just in a really gruff state. You can tell that he's just really, his hair's all unkempt, his beard is really long. I mean, he kind of looked like Rick Grimes a bit. He really did. And he goes to her, she asks what happened to him, asks if he was attacked, and he says he got into a fight or two. She says that he hasn't been to a group in months, and he says things change, and she asks if he's reverted to his non-verbal self, and he asks who the white guy is, and she says the prison doctor, Dr. Bernstein, and she asks if he needs to talk to her about anything, and he says when it comes to him, there's nothing to talk about. And she says that Squabbles hadn't said a word about him no matter how many times she's begged him to, but she could tell by his silence that he was in a very bad place. And she thought that they had broken, though, and that that she had broken him, and he was, but now he seems broken. And he says that it's not all about him, and tells her that sometimes survival costs, and she walks away, because it's true, he's not really the one that signed up for this. He was kind of forced to protect Squabbles, and he really couldn't even say no. So, but while they grow apart, we see that she has in fact grown closer to Shades, which obviously concerns Carl. So Rackham says that they're breaking his heart. Carl pushes him against a wall, says men who pushes, he pushes back hard. Tells him this is not smart, and it made him realize that there's two people in there he cares for. And Misty and Scarf then discuss the motive for Cottonmouth's attack. They don't really understand why someone would attack Cottonmouth, and she goes away, why Cottonmouth would attack Luke, and she goes away to take a call. Scarf then calls a guy named Zip and says he needs to talk to Cottonmouth. We don't know for what reason, but obviously we know that Scarf is working with Cottonmouth, and just knowing that really adds this whole layer to Scarf that I really do like. I mean, you can tell that everything he's doing for Cottonmouth, which is just interesting to see in this episode. So, Carl goes to Riva, says he needs to ask her a question, and he needs an honest answer. Asks her if she talks to anyone in there or has a relationship and related to anybody. She says she works with Bernstein, but that's to do psych events for the patients he works with, and lets him know that he's legit. Tells him that he can trust her, and he says the guards establish a fight ring, and the convicts fight them till they're broken. But he doesn't know what happens to them after. That's why his face looks the way it does, and he may have dragged her into this unintentionally. So he says Rockham's a smart guy and knows he likes coming there, seeing her, and he's going after the people he cares about, and tells her that she needs to stop coming there, leave this place, and don't come back. And which is obviously a lot to, say for someone to just leave, but that's what he needs her to do. And honestly, yeah, that is what she needs to do. And she says she can't trust anyone. She says she has worked there for years, and she has to do something. He says to leave before this place turns her to salt. He gives her a note and says to contact his lawyer, tells him he's ready to talk, and he'll use him to get out of this hellhole. Then he'll take Rackham down himself, and she asks how long he's been fighting. He says long enough, and she says wherever or whenever to find her, and then asks him why he came to her to tell her this, and he says because she gives him hope. That's why that's why. And Squabbles tells Carl that if he would have told him sooner, they probably could have done something about it, like take out Rackham, and someone would take his place. And Squabbles asks what he's going to do about it. Carl says to stop fighting, and Squabbles says he's not just going to let him walk away from the fighting game. He says he knows he's got a plan, and he's going to build evidence against Rackham and shut his shit down, and he'll do whatever he can to do that. So Carl shaves his beard and cuts his hair, well, a little bit, he shaves off his beard a little bit, he cuts his hair, and he goes to confront Rackham, and he kind of looks like Luke Cage a little bit. Now he just has hair, kind of like I do, but he's stopped by Shades, who tells him that he's been owning his place in the game, and Carl says either that or he gets owned, and asks him what he wants. Shade asks why he's trying to get out of the fighting ring. Carl asks who told him that, and Shade says that it was Riva did because Squabbles wouldn't give him up that easily. Carl asks if he's alive, and Comanche says that that's not the question. Carl says they know it happened when he faced off against two of them last time, and Comanche says last time was a test. Rackham says if he doesn't change his mind, they give him time in the infirmary to think about it, and Shade says that he's in the mind. They stomp his ass and find a new guy to fight for. Rackham, especially since he's trying to expose some shit that's going on at Seagate. They get into a huge fight. They beat him down real good. And he ends up waking up in an infirmary of sorts, and Bernstein says that he was attacked and he's got internal damage and he won't survive a transfer. And just seeing that he was actually beaten, I mean, again, we have to be reminded that this was before Luke Cage became Luke Cage. He didn't have his powers yet, and he's got internal damage and he won't survive a transfer. Riva goes to him, says that she had nothing to do with it, and they beat it out of him, and they also killed him, and she tells Bernstein that he has to try to save him, and he says he's never had to start off in this kind of shape. He's damaged goods, and she says to do it for her. He says to take the ferry home, but she doesn't have to be there for this, and she does as asked. So Bernstein tells him that he's probably going to die unless he's already dying. He tells him what he's about to see is different than anything he's ever experienced. He puts him in a tube of liquid to heal him, but Rockham tries to thwart that, and Rockham then breaks the machinery. This was the part that I thought was a little bit silly. Why would Rockham just try to kill Luke Cage? I don't really understand. I mean, it just seemed like, why does he want to kill him so badly? I just didn't really understand that. Weaken him, break him, I understand. But kill him, I don't really understand. So, he breaks the machine. Well, obviously, I mean, Luke's trying to run him out of his job. I understand that. But it's his control panel, but he gets electrocuted in the process. And when Luke emerges, he developed his superhuman strength. He first finds out basically, he gets electrocuted in the process. And Luke emerges, and he develops his superhuman strength. And I love the way this scene was done, because at first he doesn't know. He first finds out by punching the wall in a fit of rage, and he realizes that his skin is untouched, that he's perfectly fine, and he mutters Sweet Christmas, the first one I think we've gotten this season. We did hear Sweet Christmas in Jessica Jones, but we haven't heard him say that in Luke Cage yet, so I thought that was kind of cool. The flashback of him punching through the wall is intercepted with him breaking out of the rubble in Genghis Khani's, to the amazement of the firefighters and Misty. They see that he's able to break out of it, and the first thing that Luke does when getting out of the prison is to meet with Reva and cut his hair, and looks like how we see Luke now, which is interesting to see. Though he struggles to control his newfound ability, she says that no one survives Seagate's waters either, and he asks if Bernstein knew that he would get these. She says the bath was only supposed to heal him at a faster rate. He says he will do anything to keep people from knowing who or what he is, and wouldn't even know how to explain it. And I thought it was interesting that this was kind of like an origin story. Again, we didn't really know we needed this, but it really does add stuff to Luke or Carl's character. Just knowing that he has these abilities and how he got them, and that he didn't always have them. I mean, I was of the mindset that thought he had these forever, but no, I guess he didn't. And he says when they asked her about the experiments, she said they weren't true. She says she promises she'll explain it all and tell him everything. He asks how she got her hands on all of his info. She says he hasn't always been a convict, and she hasn't always been a psychologist. He thanks her and for saving his life. She thanks him for changing hers. They kiss. She says that he's going to need a new name and asks if he has any ideas. He says his father was a preacher, and he used to say one way or the other he would regret that life that he led, and used to say the Spirit of the Lord is on him because he has been anointed to preach good news to the poor, and is sent to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, which I thought was a very subtle reference to Daredevil. At least that's what it sounded like to me. So she asks what that is, and he says it's from Luke 4:18, so that's how we got the name Luke, and he used to tell him that no one can cage a man who truly wants to be free, thus how he comes up with Luke Cage. I thought that was a very cool overall, just seeing how it came with the name. Little on the nose, but I thought it was kind of cool the way they did that. So as the reporters chase him down, trying to find out how he survived the impact, he delivers his bet. We see, they're trying to figure out how he survived the impact. Misty says that obviously they have to talk because she has no idea how he did what he did, and now she can kind of tell what's going on, and obviously she's been on to him, so I don't know how this is going to go, but they're all trying to figure out, what he did, and how he was able to get out of the building, and how he fell, and how he remains unharmed, and all he says is his name is Luke Cage. He walks away, and that is the way the episode ends overall. So really good episode, but let's get into it and talk about my predictions for next week. So, not a ton going on this episode, since most of it was a flashback-heavy episode, but I did like hearing the story about Carl Lucas overall, seeing how he became Luke Cage, seeing the connection he has to Shade. Now that we know that Shade's killed, Squabbles, that is the reason why he has the beef against him that he does. That I really do like seeing. I think overall that really adds this layer to Shades that we didn't know. Shades was a very mysterious character, and now knowing that he's able to do that, I mean, it really does show what Shades is capable of. And we haven't seen Shades, I think, in a while. I don't think we've seen him since episode 1, so I'm looking forward to seeing what they end up doing with that, because I really did like seeing Shade's character in this episode. As far as Misty, though, Luke really has to be careful what he says to Misty, because I think she's getting herself involved in way too much, and we'll have to see the way that whole interrogation is going to turn out. And then Scarf, what is he going to do with Conmouth? Obviously he wants to speak to him, but what about? We don't really know. Scarf now knows all these details about Luke, and I don't know what that means for Conmouth, but if he finds out, now that he knows and Conmouth knows, I mean, Conmouth really, I think he's going to realize how outnumbered he is with Luke, but at the same time, he's going to realize, he's going to try to, I think, weaken him somehow, but we'll have to see the way that goes down. Like I said, my only problem with this episode was Rockham. I just felt that Rockham was a little cartoony and a little bit too, just set on destroying Luke. I just didn't find him to be that compelling of a character. I really did like Squabbles. I liked seeing how he met Riva, and I'm hoping we get more flashbacks, because I overall really do like this origin story. But overall, guys, most guys saw this episode, loved your thoughts on it. Again, not a ton to say, because this was mainly a flashback-heavy episode. That's my review. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you guys in my next, which will be for the series premiere of Timeless, which is a show I cannot wait for, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.